So that gives us the sort of basic version of this experiment or game. Now next up, what we want to do is we want to add like a UI canvas at the back of this table where the player can sort of guess which color they're going to draw. To use sort of virtual VR UI, we're going to need another package. So once again, package manager, add a tarball, and we're going to use ArcVR UI and import that. There we go. Now we're grabbing things with the right controller, so it seems sensible to have the UI interactions with the left controller. We're going to select the left controller, add module, and there is now a UI interaction provider here. If we add that, you see there is now an UI interaction provider here. Now, when you select it, you can see which buttons will correspond to mouse click actions, and then you can simply use basic Unity UI objects that you find in here and put them in a canvas in world space and then just interact with them through this provider. Now you will note that the interaction provider will likely give you an error here where it says that it requires an event system to work. So just as any other, when you create some Unity UI object, it will also create an event system, and in the same fashion, the UI interaction provider also needs one. So you can just click on this Fix Now button, and it will create an event system object right here. Whether you're using the standard input module or the standalone input module depends on your project settings. But if you have this red flashing error here, you can just replace it with the UI input module, the new input system. So that will depend on, that would be under player and active input handling and whichever you have set here. Either way, you will also need this VR input object. If I were to remove it, then the UI interaction provider will tell you that it requires a VR input object to work, so we'll just re-add it there. Now it's down here. And now we can just create our canvases. We could just select canvas here and place it in world space, but ArcVR UI also comes with a pre-built sort of UI objects that we can just use. And the easiest way to find them is to open the console and then type prefabs UI. So prefabs is the command to look for pre-built prefabs. UI will be the package. And then we are looking for just a basic window. Now it will set the filters in your search automatically, however it will look in assets, so if we just change that over to in packages, you will find there's 3 different ones. We've got a generic window borderless, or a generic window with no anchor. We're just going to use a borderless, which is just a canvas like this. We're going to place it behind the table and a little bit upwards. And there we have it. Generic window borderless, and now we want to add 3 different buttons to it. So essentially we want one button which starts the experiment, so just says start, then one that will be guess blue and another one that will be guess red. So we can do the same thing, prefabs UI button, look in packages, and you will note there are different types of buttons. Some of them will have the _TMP suffix, which means that they are using TextMesh Pro components instead. If you're using TextMesh Pro in your project anyways, there is no reason to not use these, as TextMesh Pro just has better performance than the standard Unity text components. But just for the purposes of this project, we don't need to import TextMesh Pro, so I'm just going to stick with the basic ones, and we're just going to add 3 of these buttons to the content panel of our generic window. 1, 2, and 3. and we're going to place them one above the other. There we go. And then these are just simple Unity buttons, and we're going to call one of them start, rename it as well. One of them guess red, and another of them, and the other one guess blue. There we go. Since these are simple buttons, we can also just like change their color. For instance, we could make the red one sort of reddish and the blue one sort of bluish. And that's all that's needed for UI interaction. If we now hit play, you will be able to see that we can interact with these buttons. At the moment, they don't do anything as this on-click event is empty, but let's just test it out. There you go. As you can see, a sort of white ray appears when I move my controller in the direction of the canvas. And when I press the trigger button on the controller, it will just activate these buttons. So for the next step, we want to just set up the overall procedure of the game. What we essentially want to do is we want to hide these two buttons and the urn. And then when the player clicks start, then these two buttons will appear. And the player will click on one of them. And once one of them has been clicked, the urn and the balls will appear and the two buttons will disappear. And after some delay for the player to pick up a ball, we will hide the urn and the ball again and show the buttons again, and repeat that for an X amount of time. So for the implementation, we can just inherit from a so-called trial experiment class. And if you're primarily looking at just like making games or similar with ArcVR, then this might not be particularly relevant to you, so I'll keep this brief. But if you're making sort of trial-based experiments where you have to repeat a certain procedure a certain number of times, then this is just a useful way of doing it. So we'll create a new script, and we'll call it something along the lines of earn experiment. So here we are inside of set script, and first things first, we want to import avr.core, so that's the namespace of ArcVR core. And then we want to inherit our object from a VR trial experiment. So the trial experiment class is a sort of fairly simple class that you can check out the source code and it should be pretty understandable. It essentially just sets up a sort of trial as a coroutine, and then you can run this coroutine however often you want. And there are also some other helpful functions like what you would run at the start of an experiment, at the end of the experiment, and such things. Let's get rid of these default mono behavior functions first. And the most important part is the primary trial experiment. The primary trial function. For that, I'll be making a public override IEnumerator, since it's a coroutine, and it's called trial. So here I've put down some basic comments on the individual steps that we need to perform. So we want to start off by disabling the urn and showing the UI. Once the player guesses which color he's going to draw, we're going to show the urn and hide the UI. And then we're going to wait for the player to draw one of the spheres, and then we repeat. So we're going to declare two sort of public game objects here. One is the urn object, which includes the urn and the balls. And the second is the UI object, which is the buttons on the canvas. So in order to disable the urn and enable the UI, we simply just set urn, set active, and we set it to false. And on UI, we run the exact opposite, and we set it to true. Then in order to wait for the next step, since this is a coroutine and IEnumerator, we simply do yield return new wait until And then the AVR trial experiment class has a member that is called can proceed, which we will be setting to true through the buttons and through other actions. And then once we so essentially this will return true once the player has clicked on one of the buttons on the UI. So once that's happened, we will set the earn to so the active of the earn to true and the active of the UI to false, so the opposite of what we had before. And then just to wait for some delay, theoretically you would now just wait until an object has been grabbed. That's not too difficult to do, but we'll just keep things as simple as possible here and just wait for a couple of seconds. So we'll do yield return a new wait for seconds, and I'm just going to go with 5 seconds. So in each trial, we will show the UI and not show the earn, then wait until one of the buttons has been pressed, then show the earn and hide the UI, and wait for 5 seconds, and then start over. So now all we need to do is to firstly add this script somewhere into our scene. So I'll just make a new empty game object and call it like earn experiment. And then we're just going to add this here. And we need to set the earn and the UI objects. That's fairly simple. I'll just grab the earn and place it here, and grab the generic window and place it here. Now we need to set the behavior of the buttons. So when we click on red, we'll just add a new event, choose our earn experiment, and set to run the proceed function, which turns this proceed to true until so for just like one frame. And then in blue we will do exactly the same thing. Earn experiment, proceed, and then the start button will simply start the experiment to begin with. So we will create a new event, select the earn experiment, and run commence. And then the integer parameter is how many trials we run. I'm just going to arbitrarily say 10. If we now click play, you will see that the sort of procedure works.